Hi, welcome to Frame Live. I'm Robert Thiemann. I'm the founder and director of Frame in Amsterdam. Today, we're going to speak about a very serious and urgent topic: inclusivity, diversity in the interior design industry. It's very sensitive, this subject, and especially for a white middle-aged man from Europe hosting such an event. I'm very aware of that. But we, as Frame, really wanted to make an effort in addressing the subject. Why? Because the AIGA, the American Institute of Graphic Arts, reported that only 3% of the world's design professionals across all disciplines are Black. This also includes the interior design industry, and that's our industry. So why is this the case? And how can we change this situation? We have two guests today. They're male. They have color. We tried to find female designers of color. We didn't manage to get one person in for a variety of reasons that I'm not going into at this moment. For me, it represents a situation. Apparently, it's not safe for female designers of color to speak on a platform like this. And this is exactly the situation that we would like to change. I am, however, very happy, very proud to have a panel consisting of Bhavin Taylor of the eponymous interior design studio based in London. Bhavin has an interior design studio mainly focusing on residential design. And Stephen Burks from Stephen Burks Man-Made, based in New York. Stephen works on interiors and products with a strong focus on craftsmanship. They will have the opportunity to introduce themselves a little bit better to you than I will do at this moment. If you can switch on your mics, guys, we can make a proper start. Hello, how are you?
Thanks.
Good.
Good. Robert.
Okay. Yeah, so I told you this is a very sensitive subject. It's also very urgent, and I learned from you, Stephen, especially in the USA. We will get to talk about that later. We have a very specific setup for this afternoon's meeting, and it is revolving around images that we, Frame, asked you to come up with, and that represent for you the situation of the past, the current situation, and what you hope will be the future of the interior design industry when it comes to inclusivity and diversity. So I will ask each of you to start talking around your image, what it represents for you, what it stands for. We begin with the past, we then go to the current situation, and we will end with the future and a conversation with the three of us, and the opportunity for the audience to also send us questions using the Q&A button that's on the bottom of the Zoom menu. What else do I need to say? Very important, this will be recorded, this session, and will be available at the beginning of next week, most likely next week, Tuesday, with a recap on Frame Web. This session is also recorded live via Facebook and will be available later on Facebook as well. Now, we have until, let's say, 5 o'clock to speak about a very sensitive, important, urgent issue. Bhavin, I will now share my screen. So Bhavin, you showed us this image.
Yep.
That represents for you the past.
Yeah, so most of you will recognize that this is a picture from the film Hidden Figures, which stars Octavia Spencer. And basically, you know, she's in a room full of white males, and, you know, she's got a loud voice that is needed in the industry, and you know, she makes her voice heard. For me, in terms of my past, coming from an Indian background, coming into a creative field isn't the norm for, you know, what our parents want us to do. They want us to be in like a secure, you know, typical role that is going to, you know, see us through our lives and stuff. And that all comes down to the fact that people are not being seen, or they're not being educated that there are coloured people in the industry, and you can, you know, be successful in it. You know, when I grew up, there was never any role models in the public eye, whether it's magazines, TV, or just in the industry itself. There was no coloured people being showcased. So I never had anyone to kind of look up to and be, well, you know, they're doing it, so why can't I? And it kind of followed through to when I studied interior design as well, which was in 2009. In a class of 23, there were 2 people of colour, including myself, and it was quite an opposite role reversal of this image, because I was the only male in the room. And, you know, all of the teaching staff were white, and because of the school that I went to, it's quite an expensive, you know, course that I did. So a lot of the people came from like privileged backgrounds, which potentially could be the reason why there's not enough diversity within that. And just kind of everything that you've seen and you've kind of grown up seeing, this kind of picture relates. You go to industry events and you are quite often the very rare few in the room. But having said that, I've never encountered any form of like racism, or, you know, it's never had a negative effect for me. However, I have heard of stories, you know, the fact that you guys couldn't get more people to speak about it kind of explains the whole industry as it is. And, you know, we have a powerful voice just as much as everybody else has. And, you know, there hasn't been enough platforms for us to showcase it.
So Bhavin, you speak about the role of parents. You speak about a lack of role models in the industry. And you speak about perhaps the lack of accessibility of education.
Yeah.
As drivers of, let's say, the current situation.
Yeah, it's more so, it's not education in schools, it's potentially educating people through the things that they see in day-to-day life. You know, it's totally different, the education that you get in school, but you know, a lot of people don't even see interior design as a career. So potentially people need to be kind of bringing that up, that it is something you can succeed in and have a career in, basically.
Now we're already discussing the future.
I know, it's already coming. I'm trying to hold back now.
We'd like to go back a couple of weeks in time, go back to the past. In fact, it was you, Bhavin, who approached us. Can you tell us why?
Well, as we all know, the horrific incident that happened in Minneapolis, and, you know, as what really annoys me is that it takes for such a horrific situation to happen for people to finally start talking about it within the industry, and just kind of finally being open to seeing what, like, I've kind of been seeing for years. And it's just such a shame that, you know, it's been ignored in the past. And it's great that people are talking about it, but it's now time to kind of talk about it, do something about it, and make a change. And that's why I've wrote to you guys, as well as multiple other, you know, leading organizations.
What was the response that you got from these organizations?
Some have responded, some haven't. Which, you know, I got a response yesterday saying that someone wanted to take the time to think about how to respond, which is totally fine. so other magazines kind of said that, you know, it's important to them and they want to address it going forward. But a lot of people are, how do we do it without rocking the boat too much or looking like they're kind of ticking a box, or, you know, there just seems to be like that fear of taking the step to, you know, develop, move us forward to the next step. So, yeah.
So indeed it is a very sensitive subject.
It is, but I just think people need to start being braver, because there's always going to be something that's a sensitive topic, and until people start taking the step to actually address it, it's never going to change.
Thank you, Bhavin. Stephen.
Yeah.
Let's go to you. You sent us this image.
Yeah, I sent you this. Go on, Robert, you can talk to it if you need to.
No, I don't need to talk. Why did you send this image to us, Stephen?
So first, I'd like to thank Bhavin for writing those letters and making this conversation possible. You know, this idea that it's a sensitive subject, I think should be questioned. I think the only way we make change is to kind of push through these difficult moments and confront them. Bhavin, you repeated a word in your presentation that is very sensitive, speaking of sensitive, to Americans, and it's Black Americans especially. It's the word colored. This is very politically incorrect, Bhavin. The word colored for us harkens back to a time when there was segregation, and when, you know, we weren't allowed to go where white people were allowed to go. This was the word for African Americans in, you know, during that time, colored people. Today, we use people of color to be, you know, quote unquote, more inclusive of other people besides the, you know, people outside, let's say people outside of the Black experience. I guess I'd also like to say that this question of why there aren't more people of color in our industry is a bit ridiculous. I mean, I think we should all, as educated people, know the answer to that. And it's a very big problem that, not to disappoint you, Robert, we won't solve during this talk. It's just not possible. You know, I'm speaking for myself here. I can't speak for all people of color, but I can say that I know it's a very big problem, and I know that it goes back hundreds of years to the beginnings of inequality between people of the African diaspora. So if we look at those hundreds of years when countries like the Netherlands, countries like the United Kingdom built their wealth on the backs of Black people, we should clearly understand that this is a problem that's been going on for centuries. The fact that George Floyd had to die to bring international attention to something that, you know, people like me in America live with every day is really sad, really tragic. And obviously, as we all know, George Floyd wasn't the first. There's a lot of things that I could say to speak to this, you know, but I'd like to say that it's not just a race problem, it's a class problem. Because in fact, it's a question of the advantaged versus the disadvantaged. And the disadvantaged have been disadvantaged for hundreds of years, and the advantaged have built their advantage over hundreds of years. And so the situation we find ourselves in, to say, you know, why aren't there more, you know, people of color in our industry, and what can we do about it in 2020, to me is a bit crazy. It's like asking, why aren't there more Black bankers? Why aren't there more Black lawyers? Why aren't there more Black policemen? Why aren't there more Black presidents? I mean, we all know the answers to this. And it's not a question of Black, let's say, inadequacy, the way the question's been framed. but it's a question of white supremacy. So, what's discouraging is that this panel doesn't make up, apart from you, Robert, anyone else. Martin Luther King used to talk about a rainbow coalition. And if we look at this panel, and we look at the way that the press and the media and, let's say, white people in general approach this problem, it's always the Black man's responsibility to answer the question, right? Why? And it's always the white man's responsibility to apologize. And this dynamic goes on year after year, decade after decade, century after century. And there really is no shift in equality. There's no shift in, let's say, diversity. There's a great book, I believe, written last year on the subject. I'll share it with you guys in the chat. My point is that there really isn't much change. And what we need to do is begin to address the white supremacy question. So rather than asking why aren't there more Blacks in the interior design industry, we should be asking ourselves why aren't there more of any people of color in the design industry? Why are there so many white people dominating all industries? And the answers to those are very complex and are systemic. So to speak to this image, I think it's pretty obvious what's going on here. This was in 2005. I was at the beginning of my career. I guess I'd only been working a few years, and I had reached a point of success that was, somehow notable to the New York Times. And obviously we all admire the New York Times for their liberal point of view. This article was written by Pilar Velades. You can see her name there. Pilar and I happen to share the Loeb Fellowship. She's a Harvard Loeb Fellow, just as I am. At the time, I wasn't, and I don't think she was. But we had a conversation over lunch about this article. She interviewed me. I talked about my work. And at the time, I didn't see myself as a Black designer. I just saw myself as a designer. Coming from New York and wanting to kind of make my way in the world of design that I admired. I lived in Milan and I saw my first Milan Furniture Fair, and I decided I wanted to be in this space. And so I just did it. And it speaks to the question of inclusion, Robert, right? To ask, how can the industry be more inclusive is like, asking, how can the industry open the door? Well, I mean, we don't want the industry to open the door, quote unquote. The door should be open already. We deserve to be there. We have every right to be there. And we have every right to be understood and represented as equals in this industry without what I consider to be a very direct racist tagline. The title of this article is Puff Dada. So I'm laughing because I was never a P. Diddy fan, this is a reference to the rapper Puff Daddy, right? And so when Pilar and I spoke over lunch, I said very openly to her, hey, I really don't, I don't have anything to do with entertainment. I think, like the people before me, I'd like to lead by example. If there aren't enough of us in this industry, I'd like to show the way. And I wasn't even conscious of the quote unquote quantification, right? George Floyd hadn't died. So I, being very much aware of who I was and where I was coming from, only wanted to represent my work and only wanted to be present in the industry. But because of the point of view of the editorial staff of the New York Times, I had to be associated with Puff Daddy. I had to be associated with the rap industry. So this kind of stereotype of, oh, if he's black, he's got to be down, or he's got to rap, or he's got to, you know, there's another article written about me that said I was tall like a basketballer and elegant like a jazz musician. So it's almost as if you can't see us unless we exist in those industries, in entertainment, in athletics. Otherwise, there's no room. And, you know, if I speak to what we do about it, and of course we're going to get there, it's about representation, and it's about representation across the board in all industries. Can I
stop you here, Stephen? Because, well, thank you very much for kicking this off in a very frank way. And coming back to my role, asking the questions, I'm willing to ask questions later on, and I will be willing to answer them. But this was the past, you know? We have been talking about the past. Let's move to the...
Well, I mean, even to call this the past, I think is a bit deceiving, right?
Yeah.
This isn't the past. This actually is the present. This is why we're talking about it. Mm-hmm. You know, this happened to me 15 years ago, but there's still Black men dying in the streets, right? There's still inequalities, racist inequalities everywhere. I mean, it's not a question of it being the past.
Unfortunately not, no, but I was merely speaking about the structure of this conversation. So I'd like to move on to the present. Did any of this that you spoke about change? Bhavin.
That's lovely, Bhavin.
So this is my niece, who pretty much says everything you need to say of what is going on right now. Has anything changed? No. Like Stephen said, it's not the past, it is the present right now. And yes, everyone's talking about it. And like I posted it on social media a few weeks ago saying that, you know, this topic of discussion isn't something for influencers to use for popularity. It's an actual topic that affects many people. And, you know, it's not to create any form of fame or anything like that from. It's about people, exactly what my niece is saying, being brave, standing up for themselves, making themselves known. And it's not about us like saying, you know, look at us, look at us, look at us. It is just a case of we're here and we just want to be showcased and seen and heard. Simple, really. So yeah, and that was a short one on that picture, I'm afraid.
It sounds simple, but is it that simple?
No, that's the thing. It's not simple, but it's simple what people need to address. And they need to talk about it, act on it, and do it. Talk is cheap. Actions are much louder.
I mean, what I see in this image is the hope of the next generation, right? I mean, this little girl has no idea of what we're talking about. She has no idea that her skin may be different than anyone else's.
Correct.
Right?
That's
she's not in a world where she's judging herself or others based on, you know, where they live, what color their skin is, and what they do, right? She's only trying to kind of, which all humans do, right, through her art, represent herself.
Correct. She kind of as well, she's made up from her grandparents come from 4 different countries. So she's a proper cocktail child. This is kind of what the future's going to be. And, you know, hopefully by the time she grows up and, you know, is in the working world, doesn't have to be having these kind of conversations and can just be her. She can be good at what she's going to be, whatever she's going to do. She just wants to be, she should be recognized for who she is and what she's bringing to the world, not because she's made up of 4 different cultures.
Bhavin, what are those 4 cultures?
Indian, Mauritian, Kenyan, and Seychelles.
What's the last one?
From Seychelles.
Wow.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So yeah, that's why this picture sums up exactly what is now and what we have to go forward for me.
The reference to the monarchy is a little scary, but the rest of it.
Well, you know, every little girl wants to be a princess. What can you do? Some of
these other role models.
Hey, some of her uncles want to be one, so you know.
Wow, there you go.
Well,
awesome.
you speak about the present, but actually you're speaking about the future. You present your niece as well, hope for change in the future.
Correct.
So, Stephen.
Yeah. So you know, when the movement really began kicking off with marches, etc., pretty hardcore, we began marching. My partner and I, and she and I would go out here in Brooklyn and just run into a protest, going down the street. You know, these are our streets. Whose streets are these? These are our streets. You know, during this curfew time, we were all kind of in resistance to that. And to be quite honest, I was asking myself at that moment, what can design do? And what do I want to say as a designer? And so she and I began thinking about this idea of creating a platform about designing diversity. And what does that look like? So this is the homepage of my website. This image is on the homepage of my website, and it's a fairly new website we're testing, and where the black square is, like the black square of Malevich, the suprematist, I wanted to take away the images that were there and place the black square to begin to speak to the solidarity of the movement, right? My solidarity with the movement. And also begin to speak to the need for the collective imagination of the design industry. So I'm using this hashtag designing diversity. We're going to be launching a platform around that soon, where we'll be working with partners to, let's say, develop or contribute to causes that I believe in. So, Robert, could I ask a small favor? I don't know if it's possible for you to step out of the slideshow, but if you could go to my website, Stephen Burke's Man-Made. I'll just show you guys. There's a list of efforts, not-for-profits, projects that, it's okay, Robert, I'll just talk to it, et cetera, that you all could support. If you're interested in supporting the movement that's happening in America right now, there's a list at the bottom of my website below that square or the rectangle that's changing. You can see like the Equal Justice Initiative by Brian Stevenson, the lawyer Brian Stevenson, his project, the Equal Justice Initiative, I would like to support. There's some other ones, the NAACP Legal Fund, I believe, is there, et cetera. So if you just scroll down to the bottom there, so read, understand, act. There are a couple of articles there. Sorry, Robert, just scroll back up there a little bit further. Yeah, here. So there are 3 articles here that I think are worth reading to understand our present condition. Once again, civil rights lawyer Brian Stevenson speaking on what's really going on in our minds and what's led us to this current condition in America. The next article, if you scroll down a little bit further, is Ta-Nehisi Coates on the case for reparations for African Americans from the Atlantic magazine. And I stand with Ta-Nehisi in reference to reparations. I believe that, it's really income inequality that is hurting most of us in this country, people of color in this country. And until we begin to speak to that and find a means of reparations, it'll be difficult for change to come. After that is the seminal New York Times 1619 project, which essentially tells the history of slavery in America. And slavery in America is not just our history, the history of Black people in America, it's American history. And so I think to really understand the context that all of this is built on, the systemic racism that all of this is built on, one has to understand slavery in America. And then, as I mentioned, the following organizations please support: the Equal Justice Initiative, obviously Black Lives Matter, For Freedoms. These are all different not-for-profits that are trying to change the legal system in America. So if we look back at the civil rights movement, and my cousin happens to be Andrew Young, former mayor of Atlanta, former ambassador to United Nations, who marched with Martin Luther King in the 60s, was at Selma, et cetera. And if we look back to the civil rights movement, we have to recognize that they weren't just marching for Instagram posts, right? They weren't just marching for the image of marching. They were marching to change laws. And until this movement gets behind changing laws, nothing's going to change. I mean, step by step, we have to chip away at the legal system that allows this kind of systemic racism to persist.
Bhavin, does this kind of law that is, let's say, enabling racism also exist in the UK? Sorry for me being ignorant about it.
Sorry, say that last bit again, you cut out.
Does this kind of law that needs to be changed in order to become systemic racism also exist in the UK?
Yes, it does for sure. Not as much as it is in America. Like I said to you before we started, I'm not the best when it comes to facts, so I'm going to leave that to Stephen. I'm just going to talk from the heart. But yeah, like, you know, it is present, and, you know, like Stephen said, it has to, you know, there's things that need to change, the laws have to change, and people's attitudes have to change more than anything. And yeah, I think that's pretty much what I'm going to say without kind of saying the wrong thing.
Okay, if you're okay, let's move on to the future. So we won't crack world change today. I didn't invite you to change the world. I didn't invite you because we are all in a specific industry.
Well, wait, I mean, I think...
we want the fact that even that industry we cannot change today, but I'm pretty sure that if more people would be aware of what their responsibility is, the situation you're in is, and why it is even good for interior design to be more diverse and inclusive, we could perhaps make a beginning today with this conversation as a starting point. Bhavin, you selected this image that should represent the future for you.
Yeah, so before I kind of talk about the image, it kind of goes back to my last image a little bit, where people need to kind of stand up and kind of take responsibility a little bit. And, you know, I know you kind of struggled to get more people to kind of talk on this thing. I'm not sure if that's okay for people to say that, but then expect to change. If people want to change, they're going to have to do things, they're going to have to stand up, they're going to have to represent. Because without us making the noise, like, who's going to listen, basically? But then it also comes down to everyone to kind of make some noise, and it comes down to major and trade media outlets, and they kind of need to collaborate, employ, contract, buy, and most of all promote us as designers, so that we're kind of educating everyone that we are here. We're educating the new generation of designers that we're here. We're also educating their parents so that they can understand what the creative industry is. And if everybody jumps on board with this, we can get to a phase where we can see an image like this. And the fact that I kind of chose this image and that people don't have any faces is because it should get to a point where our face or our race or anything, it shouldn't matter. It should come down to what we're bringing to the industry, our creative abilities and our talents, you know, and hopefully it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's going to take years, but the actions have to start now so that it becomes normal. We can't be using it as a tick box situation where people are like, oh, we've just created a diversity issue, so we've done our bit. That's not acceptable either. It's something that is just ongoing so that it no longer becomes a topic. And yeah, and for people to kind of say to me now as well that, oh, we're scared to kind of act on it or help bring you to the, or like help give you a platform or something like that, I don't think that's an acceptable answer anymore.
Well, some people seem to be heavily traumatized and don't feel safe to speak about their experiences on a, let's face it,
yeah,
a predominantly white platform.
Which is understandable, but how can people expect change if they're not looking to stand up themselves? You know, I might be saying things that people don't want to hear right now, and I might be offending people or making people angry, but it's a conversation that has all of these reactions, and for change to happen, people have to air their voices, air their opinions, and if it has to be, upset a few people along the way.
Okay, very clear, Bhavin.
Thank you.
You're not upsetting me, that's...
That's good.
Stephen.
So let me first say that this is a kind of indirect image in relation to the conversation, but for me it starts with the youth. It starts with us beginning to look at the systems that hold back young people from entering all industries in the arts. So in America, right, we have defunded the National Endowment for the Arts over the past, I don't know, several decades. And unfortunately, we don't have arts funding in many of our primary schools and high schools. And so there isn't the opportunity for young people to understand that there can be a career in the arts, let alone a career as specific as an industrial designer or an interior designer or an architect. So these, I think these issues really stem from us beginning to understand that there aren't the opportunities for young people to, at least in America, right, find a path to interior design, first of all. And this is presuming that the door is open, once again, that we don't have to go knocking on the door, that the door is already open. Craig Wilkins, a PhD, has done quite a lot of work in the field of looking at why young African Americans aren't going into architecture and interior design. He'll be speaking on design and dialogue. I believe it's tomorrow. Design and dialogue is a project that I'm involved with the design historian Glenn Adamson through Friedman Benda Gallery. And I will begin hosting a series of talks beginning in July as well, along with Glenn, which I hope can continue to discuss this topic around who's working in design that we should know, that we don't know. I wanted to show you guys this book, Diversity Inc. By Pamela Newkirk. Pamela spoke here in Brooklyn, and we went to the talk. And this book I highly recommend because she essentially outlines how many different industries in America have hired chief diversity officers to try to solve this problem. And I guess that globally, that's probably happening, right? And unfortunately, the corporate culture uses the diversity officer as a kind of shield to say, hey, look, we've done something. But in fact, over the past 10 years, very little has changed in terms of diversity in these spaces. I think once we can begin to address education, it really is about representation in higher education. So graduate schools. I teach at the Harvard Graduate School of Design and the Masters of Design Engineering. And the students there have two organizations, the African American Students Union and the Africa GSD. And these two unions have gotten together and written a statement to our current dean, Sarah Whiting, and the administration, calling for more representation, not just in the curriculum, not just in the student body, but in the in faculty, in the lecture series, etc. So, you know, Bhavin, we and Robert, we all have to do our part, and everything counts. Everything counts. The students coming together and writing a letter at this particular moment counts. Bhavin, you writing a letter to Robert counts. Like, all of these efforts actually move us further toward change. And I would ask all the people that are not of color, it's so bizarre to talk about people in this way. I would ask them to listen and to be conscious and to understand that, that there are people that have a very different daily experience in the industry than they do. And when they can and how they can, they should make space for them. Just to speak to that image one more time, one thing I forgot to mention, and they'll kill me if I don't say it. I know we're running out of time, Robert. But that image, I'm also consulting at Berea College. Berea College is the first college in America to desegregate in 1855 in the South. And so Berea College has a student work-study program, and they have a craft department, and about 100 students are working in student craft, and I'm consulting with them on a project called Crafting Diversity. And so we're literally looking at ways to have a participatory project with the students that allows them to have a voice in what they make. And this thing that you're looking at there on the screen is called the broom thing. And that's one of the most conceptual pieces to come out of the project so far.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you.
Go to stop share and go to the view that makes us all three of us visible to the audience.
I'm going to just quickly jump in if that's okay.
Sure.
What Stephen said about where it comes down to education. One of the people that I've reached out to was the school that I studied in, and they're putting things into place where they're going to be offering like a scholarship to less fortunate students, and they also want they want to create a panel similar to this that goes to visit schools to kind of talk about interior design and how it can be a career and how you get into it and things like that. So, you know, that's only one school. So I'm just kind of reaching out to any education people who are listening. You know, I'm happy to come and talk to you guys and talk to your students or potential students, because this is the only way that they're going to have access to the interior design world as a starting point.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Bhavin. Actually, do you have any questions for me? Stephen, you started off by saying that you guys are always asked to tell your stories and to come up with solutions. I am the white guy asking the questions. You spoke about white supremacy. Do you have a question for me as a member of the press?
Well, I have a lot of questions, but I mean, you know, I guess the reoccurring question in my mind is what your consciousness is like, and that it requires, you know, a man like George Floyd dying and people marching in the streets to just have a conversation about inequality, which is so obvious, I believe, to everyone. You know, Robert, we've known each other since the beginning, and I consider you a friend. And of course, I don't mean to disparage you at all, but or your company. But you know, the question I think everyone's probably wondering is how many people of color is Frame employing? And you know, a lot of the magazines and media outlets here in the States have been questioned in a similar way, right? And because everyone, I think, if we once again look at this as advantaged versus disadvantaged, right? The advantaged have all the advantage. I mean, you know, to have us here and say why, and what can we do? What can we do? You know, it's great to listen to the voices of people of color, but I think you also have to be questioning yourself because, you know, you have to open that door.
Exactly. That's what I've been doing over the past couple of weeks. So personally, I don't feel guilty. I can say with my hand on my heart, we have never looked at people or work in terms of color, race, age, sex, geographic location, anything else. We just look at work. We just look at the output of people, at concepts, ideas, products, spaces, regardless of who made them. At least,
yeah, but
at least, let me finish. I practiced hard on this. At least that's what I thought until now. Until, I must say, last week. Last week, I read something on a website from, I don't know who. It was something like a manifest about what white people, and I think the media in general, could do to create change. And one of the things was stop looking with Eurocentric eyes and stop advocating Eurocentric aesthetics. And when I read that, I thought, yes, now I feel guilty. And because that's the one thing that we have always been doing without knowing it. Because we were not diverse enough, we've always been looking at our world, at our industry, with European eyes, with white eyes, so to say. So that is a thing that sentence made me aware of what role we can play as a company, and perhaps more Western, European, even American media altogether. Stop looking with a specific set of eyes that color the world. So change your lenses.
well,
this is something that really made me conscious of our own task and our own behavior so far. So
yeah.
that's the beginning of change for us.
Well, I've always said that design is a Western concept. Other places in the world have been making things for centuries. And they make things related to their society, related to their culture, but it's not considered design. We're all educated and all guilty in that regard of being educated from the Western canon, right? And so the lenses that you wear, we also wear. I don't think that that's specific to, let's say, the white supremacist culture that controls the industry and all industries. I think that is deeply rooted in how we view culture in general, right? Western culture or European culture is valued, while other cultures from other places in the world, let's say cultures that may not appear to be as wealthy, are devalued, right? It can be considered luxury in Europe and craft in the Philippines, for example, if they're making the exact same thing. And so I think it's great that you come to that realization and you'll begin to show work from other places in the world that are probably outside of your typical scope. But there's also the issue of a kind of meritocratic statement that you made, right? You only look at good work. And so
the question behind that is, what is good work? What is,
well, where does good work come from, right? And good work is generally, it's back to who has access to the education, who has access to the wealth and the means to build, and who has the clients, and on and on and on. So, you know, your statement, good work probably in most cases equals white work, right? Equals work from people who are of European descent. And so,
if you look at aesthetics, perhaps, but I think this is the time to for the design discipline altogether to stop looking at it as being an industry, a sector that is first and foremost about form, color, material, finish. It should be about people. It should be about what design can mean for people. It should be about what spaces can mean for people. How can spaces make people feel better? How can spaces make people healthier? How can products be more sustainable? How can be the less of a burden for the planet? That should be the discussion in design, not what color does something have? Is there a new shape of a chair available on the market? That should not be this discussion anymore.
I mean, I don't know that, you know, I love color and I love shapes, and I don't know that I would just push that off the table. But I think the 21st century and this movement that we're all experiencing right now are very much about embracing meaning, right? And so how products and spaces and the built environment in general, cities, how do they represent the meaning and values of the people that live there? I think consumers are becoming obviously more savvy to all of the issues that you mentioned, but I think those issues revolve around what is the meaning behind the product. And the next generation of designers approaches this world with meaning at the forefront. And I think that what we'll begin to see is that there's commercial value in that as well. And so that kind of shift, I think, is inevitable.
Going back to what you said about people, like magazines choosing what is good design and what they think is good design. Each publication is going to have its own unique style to what they think is good design, and potentially they need to come out of that and broaden their offerings. You know, I always talk about L decoration, which is literally page after page after page of beige interiors. Now, it's all very great. They've created a brand, but how will they ever be able to showcase and platform designers like myself who are all about color, 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 color? Like, if people are not going to change their view of good design or what they want to showcase in their publications or even in the TV or whatever, until people change their mind frames, we're not going to get that platform. And that is a key thing that needs to change. You know, we all, like even myself, I'm true to my brand for all my work that I create, but it's always catered to each individual client. So if we're able to do that, why can't platforms do the same?
They can, and they should. Can I go to a question that's living with somebody in the audience, Alessio Cavallaro? He's asking, why do you think African Americans are more readily accepted and promoted within arenas of music and sport and not in other disciplines? Perhaps because they generate more profits in those fields? That's tying in with what we were talking about before, Stephen, that the New York Times magazine wanted to relate to music and sport.
Right. I mean, those are industries that, I mean, in some cases that we invented. You know, jazz is considered America's only true art form. And jazz comes out of the music of slaves. So it's, you know, that, for example, is part of our culture, inherently part of our culture. If we look at, you know, other musical art forms, I mean, hip hop is another one that obviously could be credited to African Americans. But these are industries that we don't own. These are industries that we don't have enough ownership of. And these are industries that are very easily accessible without higher education. So unfortunately, there are industries that a lot of young people see as an outlet for fame and success and money, as opposed to the fields that might require more of a kind of traditional path. So I think that it's just about accessibility and a kind of logarithmic curve of success that African Americans have had in those industries.
So you're saying that if they would have more access to education in the arts, then we would see more Afro-Americans.
Absolutely, and representation begets representation, right? Like if we don't see ourselves in interior design, we don't think that it's accessible. If we only see ourselves in athletics and entertainment, then we think that's where we belong. And I think that that's probably true for all people.
Yeah, I can kind of throw in, like, as an Indian growing up, you know, we don't see people that look like me in the industry. So our parents are not getting the knowledge that, you know, these are industries you can go into. They're seeing plenty of doctors, engineers, accountants, all the things that I will never be. And it's just understanding that, giving people that cultural education, again, having role models that are in the media, on TV, just in life in general, so that people can see someone that looks like them.
There is an important role for the media in terms of representing a more diverse group of practitioners in interior design, that is.
In terms of, like, in the UK, like, right up until this day, we've only got one, I hope I'm going to say this right, Stephen, you might tell me off, but a mixed race, a designer. We have one that is on TV currently. Up to this date, we've had nothing. And, you know, I've had casting calls from production companies throughout the years that I've been doing interior design, and I'm still waiting. Now, they all talk about, we want to represent diversity, we want to showcase the industry as it is, but why are we not doing it yet? Why haven't I been given a shot at it or anything like that? So,
didn't David Adjaye have a television show in the UK once? I mean, I guess it was a long time ago, but I heard about it. I never saw it.
That's not a name that I'm familiar with. So, yeah. But, like, you know, it's that whole thing of one person. It's not enough. You know, there's so many other designers in the public eye, and having one or two is not enough. We need to have an equal amount to kind of then educate everybody else that it's okay.
For me, the picture is quite clear. It starts with parents. It starts with education. It starts with accessibility to education, with finding role models with the same color in this profession. Then the profession itself, the manufacturers, institutions, clients, they need to have open doors, as you were saying, Stephen. And that's probably my last question for you. Did you find ever closed doors?
I mean, I think we probably all have found closed doors in our lives. The reason those doors were closed is unknown, right? In most cases, for me. But I can also say that it's also about ownership, right? We haven't really talked about ownership, that you know, people of color have to rise to the position of ownership. So, you know, it's always been important to me since I realized what I wanted to do, that I had my own company, my own studio, and it hasn't been easy. I'm sure it hasn't been easy for you either, Bhavin, but you know, without any kind of familial support, just kind of jumping into an international career and having to support that myself has been very challenging. But I think we all need to understand that, you know, it's not about waiting for inclusion, waiting for that door to be opened from people outside, but about also owning the position ourselves, owning the media outlets, and owning our own studios, and owning our own architecture firms, and teaching, you know, and kind of really pushing into the spaces where we aren't currently available.
I don't think I've been stopped by any doors, but I'm the kind of personality, and probably Stephen is the same, that even if there was a closed door, we're going to push really hard to open that door right through it.
Yeah.
And that's what it takes, you know. I get people are scared and whatever, but it takes us brave few to kind of take the first few steps to then create a path for everybody else. And as much as we all think we can do it on our own, we can't. We need the support, and we need the support from the industry. And that's basically the bottom line for me.
You need support from the media, media like Frame, trade media like Frame. I get that. So it's all taken on board.
Hey, you know, if I go back to that Puff Dada article, there, you know, it sounded all bad, but and it maybe didn't make Pilar out to be the, you know, maybe it made Pilar out to be the culprit. Obviously, there are more people involved than just the author of the article. But it was also said in that article, which actually changed my life, that I was the first African American to make an impression on the rarefied world of international contemporary design. Mm-hmm. And so to have the New York Times make a statement like that about me was a really important moment. It kind of changed my outlook on what I was doing and why I was doing it, and kind of gave me more meaning to move forward with my identity at the forefront of what I'm doing. So even the most difficult circumstances, let's say, right, can lead to positive change.
Okay, that's a really great statement to end this conversation with. Unless you have one last thing to say, one last question to ask.
No, all I want to say is, just like Robert's been able to give us a platform, I hope that other people are going to do the same.
Okay, well, that's not in my control, but what is in my control,
but if they're watching,
my control is what Frame will be doing. And yeah, we heard you today. We have set the wheel in motion. We know that we could have been more inclusive in the past, and will be more so in the future. Thanks for being with us today, Bhavin and Stephen, sharing your stories, sharing your experiences, and pointing out what we, white people, we, the press, could do to change the situation. Again, we won't solve the problem today. We will probably not solve the issues in the interior design industry today, but we made a start. As you said, Bhavin, it's important to act, not only to think, but also to act. And this is what we've been doing today. Thanks again for that. Thank you, audience, for being with us today. Again, there will be a recording of this session available early next week, most likely on Tuesday, with a recap of this conversation and a posting of the full recording on YouTube and on frameweb.com. Last thing for me to say is that tomorrow, same time, so 4 p.m. standard European time, there will be a conversation about design for the growth. So it's a collaboration that we have with Design March from Iceland, and it will talk about another issue that has been set in really big time motion thanks to Corona. A new way of looking at the world, perhaps not embracing further growth and further damage to the planet and to people, inducing more stress on the environment and on people, but trying to live with less, with not growing. So that's what we will be talking about tomorrow. How can design contribute to that? Thank you again, and have a nice day.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Bhavin.
Thanks.
Bye.